Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Roast from the Ashes podcast. I'm your host, Bas Porter, and this is an interesting episode because we have a legend in the media industry. He has served people from Tony Robbins to Steven Spielberg, and I continue for literally 45 minutes. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the legend himself, Tom Martin. Tom, how are you today?
Hey, Baz, it's great to be with you. This is quite a build-up. I'll do my best to live up to that.
You just turn up and you make miracles happen. Tom, can you just, as I said, I pointed towards what you've done in the past, who you are. Can you elaborate on that for the listener, please?
Absolutely. I was born to be a journalist, and that I grew up in the household of a journalist. My dad was a night shift reporter when I was born. Way back in 1959, and then became a newspaper editor. He helped create USA Today, which launched in 1982, and various other newspapers around America. We're in a changing world where newspapers are vanishing a little bit, or at least becoming digital. But I guess it showed me that was a noble path to take, and journalism could be a way of celebrating others and shining a light on maybe what is troubling in our world so that we can do something about it, not to alarm people unnecessarily, but in a constructive way. So I started working at CBS News in Washington while I was still in college down at Georgetown University in Washington. And one thing led to another. I moved from Washington, D.C., covering politics for CBS News up to New York City, a wonderful show that's still on the air called CBS Sunday Morning that did a lot of stories about art and music and nature and things like that. And that's where I discovered my mentor, an old journalist, been gone almost 30 years now, but Charles Kuralt, who had a little segment on the evening news called On the Road, where he met regular people, not celebrities, not politicians, but he really, was making the point that each and every one of us has wisdom. And I love that idea. And then when I pivoted from television news into the public relations field, to work with authors and other people, I felt that was my opportunity to be a supporter of other people who wanted to make a positive difference in the world, such as yourself. I love the people that you magnetically attract there. It's very cool.
So where have you come into the journalist field from television, from doing all that? Where have you been really challenged in the transition from the older version of media into what we're now calling podcasts, there are social media, there's a lot of hype at the moment about biased media. I don't know enough about it, that's why I'm asking you. And I'm sure the person listening going, what's biased media? There is always an agenda because they're selling products. And the narrative at the moment, and in the past 10 years that I've seen, there has been a productization of human beings because the longer they keep you on a platform, the more advertisement they send you, the more money that they get. What's been the transition and the difficulties that you've seen in the industry that you've been in the last 10 to 20 years?
That's an excellent question. How many hours do you have for that? I'll share a few thoughts on that. That is
Sure.
Complicated, interrelated question. Hold on one second. Okay. But I think that we can't totally generalize about the media, even though I do use that expression quite a lot. There are certainly powerful forces in the media. Rupert Murdoch, Jeff Bezos owning the Washington Post, that kind of thing. Mergers going on where Larry Ellison of Oracle fame, billionaire, and his family want to buy and basically have bought CBS News and installed a thought leader with more conservative leanings. And so I don't want to be one of these people in a certain generation while getting cranky. Things aren't any good anymore, and you should have been here 30 years ago. There's a lot of stressful things because of that commoditization. And I guess every newscast, I still have a lot of respect. A lot of people, maybe of a certain age, remember Walter Cronkite. At one point, Walter Cronkite in the 1960s and 70s, when there weren't 500 channels, there was a kind of a basic evening newscast, the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, and he reported on the John F. Kennedy assassination and man landing on the moon and so on, which I think is a great example. As at the time we're recording this, there's a team of NASA astronauts returning from the dark side of the moon. And it's a very positive, inspiring story. So those kind of stories still exist. But all along the way, any television show, any magazine, any local newspaper, whether it's the New York Times or a small town newspaper, there's been that side of content and investigatory ethical journalism combined with a commercial profit thinking. So it's always been a challenge, but I think that there are still a lot of very journalists who deserve our respect out there. You know me, I'm very interested in the personal development movement, Tony Robbins and coaches like that. And so in that world, I have a number of friends that don't listen to the news. It's totally contrived to scare you to death. And tune in at 11 if you don't want to lose your children. It's, oh my God, what's going on in the world? So there is that side of the little hooking people. You get to watch the commercials. But there's still a lot of journalists doing very important, good work out there. So that's good.
It once heard it described like the pendulum, where you have a narrative and it swings one way and then it swings the other. And it's all about learning and then understanding where it swings.
Yeah, no, it's true. I remember, I don't want to reveal my political leanings too much, although it'll probably become obvious within moments. But I remember when Donald Trump first announced he was going to run for president 6 or 8 years ago, I asked a friend who's a professional futurist, there's Faith Popcorn, a professional futurist, and said, do you think this guy can really be elected president? And he said, it's possible. And the way society and change works is when that, like you said, the pendulum reaches like an inevitable, almost like a breaking point. That's happened in the African-American civil rights movement. Probably happened with Gandhi in India. It's like when things get to that point, that's when change happens. So much of we might not like it, maybe we should just adjust to that. That is how it works.
So the other thing is, without getting into that down a rabbit hole, suddenly change is always inevitable. And so when you have change, you have people get comfortable, there's always going to be a backlash, no matter what industry, whether it be political, religious, business, it doesn't matter what demographic you're in, it could be a class status. It's going to be... Because
I'll add on to a little bit of what your question was earlier about how things are changed. So I spent 20 years as a television news producer. Then I pivoted, I guess you'd say, into the public relations world, and first working for a rather large PR firm in New York. And a number of us, the top executives, were laid off because it was going through some changes. Social media was young then. And so one guy my age, or maybe a little older, said, man, I miss the way that public relations used to be. You'd write a press release that looked like a newspaper article, and you'd go swing by your friend's office at the newspaper. They'd drop it right in. It was like, man, I don't like the way things are. And I thought, I can understand how you might miss such an easy scenario, but I'm intrigued with social media. And you and I are in a mastermind all about AI and interest in the tools and apps and technology. And it can be used for good also. I said, I'm not going to agree with you that I miss those days. The world, it always will be changing, like you just said. So I look at each and every PR project that I work on and some of the coaching that I do of people to do their own PR, whether it's for a book or social movement or something like that. I've been working currently on a project that helps homeless children, which certainly makes my heart feel good, being invited to be on a team like that. But there's, like you just said, there's always going to be change. And so it's kind of, I look at it like a creative challenge, like where do the tools stand right now and how can we use them to move forward to get this story out into the world? Because storytelling is timeless. Stories of people with dreams and aspirations and facing obstacles and wanting better for them, their families and for their society, that kind of thing. I guess I've learned to be comfortable with change and look at it like a creative challenge.
And this is what I find remarkable about you, Tom, is being able to adapt over the years, going back into the PR circumstances and the way that public relations have changed. And in the decades, going back 30 years ago with Tony Robbins in the infomercials and him, he'd be like, come and buy my course. It's a 3-day cassette that people used to go order and put in the mail in the checks, and it used to be sent to them. This sort of PR now has obviously rapidly transformed, where it's a very on-demand era where you just click a button and you can get access to it.
Yeah.
What was the most memorable movement you were a part of, and how did that impact not just you but society of the people you were involved with?
That's an excellent question, and let me backtrack momentarily to show people what the point you just made, because it's a good one. As you and I met through a certain mastermind community, and last year at one of those live events that he and his wife put together. I remember he was telling us, and he didn't name the name of the company or whatever, but he's quite skilled in the marketing field on a high level internationally. And he said, yeah, some fast food company hired me to study the metrics of what the customer flow was. And we figured out a plan to bring another 100, 300, 500,000 people into their fast food restaurants. And he said, I don't know, I'm not sure this is a direct quote, but he said something like, yeah, I got the CEO drunk because I really wanted to hear some truth here or whatever. But somehow the CEO revealed, yeah, there have been some memos that for every 100,000 people, there's like a 5% increased risk of cancer because the cheese that we use in our fast food, we make it down in Mexico now, so we're not bound by FDA regulations here in the United States. And he just said, that's unacceptable. I'm shocked by that. I'm not going to continue my allegiance to making the big dollar after hearing that. It's like that elevated him in my eyes. I respect that decision. And it's the same sort of thing with all these new tools and so on, but we can also use them to reach the right audience of thought leaders and use our own conscience. Certainly a lot of scare stories about where AI is headed and so on. But anyway, I'll shift to your second question, which I do appreciate. I am working on putting the finishing touches on my first book right now. I had this idea to 10, 12 years ago to write a book because I love authors. And so I thought, I'll write about some of the people, famous people and household names that I've worked with because people might be interested in that. Rock stars and politicians and artists and all this kind of deal. And then after a year or two, slowly working on it, came to me like, hey, I'm always telling my PR clients, it's not about you or about me, it's about serving the people. So that's a very egotistical thing you have in mind, Tom. So I thought, okay. So over the years, I've shifted it so that now it consists of 5 chapters of people that I really admire, appreciate the opportunity to work with creatively. And the 5 people are Paul McCartney, Steven Spielberg, jazz legend Miles Davis, South Florida songwriter Jimmy Buffett, and then an artist in Montana, not as famous as those guys, but successful, and the artistic principles that made them tick or make them tick that we can all use in our own lives. And I thought this gives me a chance to tell some stories of how thrilling it was to work. And I didn't work with Paul McCartney for a long time, certainly, but just to be on that level. And I love being with these people because even at the super level of success, by anybody's standard, financially or however we might define success, they still felt like an enthusiasm. Paul McCartney got into painting and classical music. It wasn't just like some of the greatest pop songs of our time. Steven Spielberg felt the social responsibility. He just finished that movie Schindler's List about the Jewish Holocaust. And so he certainly felt that we can all use our artistic abilities for good, keeping conscience in mind. So I just love those little discoveries. I happened to be seated next to the great naturalist Jane Goodall on an airplane. I was flying from London to New York doing a music story in London for CBS News. And they said, would you like to take this empty seat up front? I was like, oh my gosh, it's Jane Goodall. So we got to talk for 6 hours and I did a project about her. She's going to be in one volume of a similar book. And it's not so much that these people are famous, but it's the nice discovery that they are just as enthusiastic as we are. Like what lights them up, and think that after a Beatle like Paul McCartney that he'd become jaded, nothing. And I have met some celebrities who are kind of jerks, I must say, but certainly all of these people felt that enthusiasm and loved meeting new people and doing new things. And I love what's possible in life because and we've been discussing, I guess, there's certainly aspects of life that are stressful and disappointing and certain things happening in government and society. Oh man, that's I'm really troubled by that. So we need to do our part to bring hope and brightness back in, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. No, 100%. This is why I love having these conversations with people like yourself, because they do inspire others. And the best way I heard it described once was, you need to learn to play the game. And the whole game of business and life, people take it far too seriously. And that isn't to say for one moment life should not be taken seriously to a point, and business the same. But entrepreneurs especially, a lot of us, and I had to learn this the hard way, didn't understand to be a different role into the business than we are elsewhere. And the transition from coming into business and serving others versus the egoic stance of, I don't care, it's me, and that's it. This is where it sets people like yourself apart, Tom, because you're very heart-centered, you're very humble. You've served entrepreneurs the highest level, artists and at the highest level, but you're so grounded in who you are today. And that takes a lot of self-work, self-development, personal development. Who has been your model, if you've had a model, to aspire to? I know you mentioned earlier you had a mentor, but who was that person to aspire to that you set your standard? I know you mentioned your father, who obviously had some great success and has some huge influence on yourself. But where is the model for you that set the bar originally?
That's an excellent question. To say specifically, I can think of several people. I am grateful to both of my parents. It was, like so many of us, was sad losing them within the past couple of years. But they both met in journalism school before I was born. And I remember when I was very young, not just watching news events on television like the first man on the moon on their little black and white television set, but also my father made it a point for me to see the kind of civil rights protest marches with the police unleashing the German Shepherd guard dogs and fire hoses. It was pretty, intense stuff for a young child. But I think he knew that history was unfolding here, and especially there was some injustice going on. And both my parents instilled in me that we must treat each other with respect and appreciation. And again, I still think of my mentor as that anchorman, correspondent Charles Kuralt at CBS News, famous for going on the road, driving all the back roads of America and meeting a farmer or bricklayer, or it's not necessarily a PhD scientist or anything like that, but noticing, just pausing, because sometimes people don't pause enough to listen. And that's why I love what you do and just the way you carry yourself. And you know that one of my little taglines is wisdom all around us. There is wisdom all around us if we were to listen to different people. And so he was a big influence. Another person who stopped her is my friend by the name of Scarlett Lewis in Connecticut. And about 12 years ago, there was a terrible school shooting. We have way too many school shootings in America. It's very troubling for us. And so they were in the Sandy Hook, Newtown, Connecticut school shooting. There were 20 little first grade or 6-year-old children killed by an older, often it's an 18-year-old troubled white kid. And his parents thought it was a fine idea to give him an automatic assault rifle. Oh my God. But she lost her little 6-year-old then. And she said, I feel it's my mission to carry on in his name. I believe his message was that we can all choose love and forgiveness rather than hate and anger. So I'm going to visit as many schools in America as I can and say, this was what Jesse wanted us to all know. And she carried that message into prisons, a little circle of convicted murderers and what. So it's like people like that who had something thrust into their lives that they never expected, never wanted. But they said, I guess I can either choose to crawl back under the covers or turn this into meaning and move it into the future. I really admire people like that.
I love what you just said about turning it into meaning. And especially when you hear about people going back into the prison system, helping people reform. Man, I don't know, I think it was Stanford, or I think it was Stanford, if I remember rightly, where they did a study to reform prisons. And there was obviously a control group, there was a right group and a left group, B and C, just saying. And they did experiments with them, psychological experiments with them to see if they could actually change their mind states, their sets. And by looking at themselves positively in the mirror, speaking positively, I love you, and the affirmations. And over a period of time, the control group stayed the same. The other group obviously got worse. But the group that was giving positive affirmations and positive feedback to themselves in the mirror actually had something like above 80% improval rate just by in their psychology and how they viewed themselves. That group of people were released into it when they were supposed to be released back in the future. And the percentage of reoffending from that subject group was down to about 11%, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But going back into what you were saying about giving back and doing good in the communities, press, PR, social media, podcasting, blogs, all media, because there's a lot of it, has the potential to do positive impact, which is what you stand for. And Paul McCartney, I was privileged enough to go to his concert here in Denver last year for my birthday, and I automatically thought of you. I thought, what if he knows him? It was a bit late to try and get hold of you, and anyway.
It's great that it's still going strong after all these years, yeah.
I'm to get where we were sitting for one of my birthdays. I'm not going to tell you how old I am. It could have been his last tour. I really don't know. But to see that caliber of act and the showmanship, one of the things he said, he took his shirt off, he took his jacket off, and had the artwork that he made inside the clouds. And you probably know better than I do. He said, "This is the only costume change I will make this entire." I was all the greats like Taylor Swift, Jay-Z, they always do Rihanna and more. They do all these television costume changes, and he just went, "This is the only costume change." I thought
it was great.
It's brilliant.
Two small concerts in Los Angeles last week, and it was recently the 50th anniversary of Apple, so he was the featured performer at Apple, the Cupertino headquarters there. Yeah.
He's just incredible. But what is the? You were talking to that person now who's going, "I want to work in journalism. I want to give a positive impact," because many people do. That's how they set out. What is that advice you would give to that person now, going, "How do I get into this?" Because you just launched your mastermind group,
yeah,
and you're teaching the 5 steps. How is that? How was that formed? How do they get hold of you for that purpose? And if they're questioning, "Is it all right for me?" what would you speak to with that?
Sure. I appreciate that question. And I'll circle back a little bit. You were telling me about that Stanford University study of prisoners. And then we were talking about Paul McCartney a little bit, but that story about prisoners is very meaningful to me because I think it speaks to self-esteem and how we feel about like one of the coaches I enjoyed studying with and got to meet him at an event last year, Brendan Burchard. He said after he had a near fatal car accident, he's like 19 or 20 years old, crawling through the shattered glass and looking up at the moon. He said, "I was asking these questions. Did I live? Did I love? Did I matter?" I think to some degree we all ask, did my time here on the planet make any difference? I hope so. There may be some people who don't really care. Oh my gosh, that's, whatever. It's like, I just don't think like that. But I think that most people do, or most people, if they were honest with themselves, if they can make a difference in the life of someone else, they would appreciate that. And I really believe that we all have that potential, that we all have unique gifts and passion and a life experience that we can harness all that to make a difference in the lives of other people. And so I just love that we can do that through the power of storytelling. So that's why I love working with authors. It's funny, our friend recently said, "Tom, just leave it with authors," but I help coaches and speakers and experts and parenting experts and wellness experts. And so it's like, it feels good to be able to make a difference in the lives of other people. And it's funny, I was preparing a newsletter. I hadn't sent one out in a very long time. And I was thinking of quotations. I love quotations. And one is the famous quotation from the anthropologist Margaret Mead, where she said, "Who is to say that a small band of committed citizens cannot make a difference in the world, bring about change? In fact, they can, and it's the only thing that ever has." Wow, that's really insightful. And then the other one, quite famous quote from Marianne Williamson, where she said, "Our greatest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. And by shining our light, we give permission to others to shine their light as well." So I love if I can play a role in, get off the sidelines. You have a story, you have some wisdom that others could really benefit from hearing, whether it's between the covers of a book or a TEDx talk, or we're speaking at their local library or something like that. And I just love that this is a subject that interests me, that I find great pleasure in, that I can make a living doing, and like supporting others who have that desire, because I think so many of us do. And like that study about the prisons, like it's transformational when we can tap into our own value as a human being. I do matter. I can help other people. tragic. You probably have talked to some people like this, but who feel like, I don't matter. I've just been like kicked to the curb of society. Why am I even here? That's terrible. We should all, if we can possibly find the reason why we were here and understand that we can help others, it's wonderful.
Yeah. I have a quote I say very often, especially on the podcast, and it's, you are the miracle. And I fully believe in that statement, because people don't give themselves enough credit for what they do and who they are and how they show up today. When maybe a few years ago, even yesterday, in some cases, that wasn't possible. And people need to do more of remembering that it takes trillions of things to happen for you even to wake up in the morning, to even open your eyelids. So when I say you are the miracle, you're a direct manifestation of miracle in process. Never forget it. Never ever, no matter how bad days you get, how bad your day gets. Yes, we will have shitty days. Yes, it doesn't always work out the way we expect it to. But there's a reason for it. You're not fully aware of the gravity of what the reason is most of the time. I know I'm not. And I'm certainly not a mind reader. I'm not clairvoyant. I don't have all the answers, as you don't either. But as soon as you recognize that you are part of a process and you're in process, and that miracle is you, life changes just a little bit every single day. Before we post for this part, so I want to just circle back around to how do I get hold of you, and what's the best way to reach out if I want to inquire about your mastermind group, and what does that look like?
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate that. They can email me, tom@tommartinmedia.com, or they can search for Tom Martin Media. LinkedIn is a good way to do it. There are a lot of Tom Martins in the world, but there's probably only, if you go for Tom Martin Media, you'll find me. But I appreciate that. Yeah, one of the things I'm very excited about now, because I really do feel called to help other people and make a difference in their lives. And sometimes people think, oh, I've heard about public relations, and isn't that for very billionaires or something like that? I don't think I'm in that ballpark, but it doesn't have to be. Let me start a group where I can talk about the steps. I think maybe you didn't put it in quite these words, but earlier we're talking about when you understand how things work. And I think I've benefited from learning a framework. There are certain steps to focusing on your story, to identifying who the people are, such as yourself, who carry people's stories to the world. And then how do you let them know about your story in a way that might say, oh yeah, that's a good fit for me. And then yes, I'd like to interview you. There's certain things you can do to prepare or think about strategically. How can I make the most of this opportunity? Sure, your wisdom gets out to the world, and through an interview like this or an article in a magazine, it can be a first step to an ongoing relationship. And people say, wow, because we all identify. I think you and I are very similar in terms of our values and like about others in the world. And so we all kind of gravitate towards people that we resonate with. And I love putting people into that position to win. And I don't want anyone to feel like, let me just stay here on the sidelines. And there's enough experts out there in my field. No, we all have unique wisdom. For a very affordable monthly fee, which is $49 a month, I said, let's get a group of people together, and we'll have group calls, and I'll say, here's how you need to take it step by step and find that clarity and that focus and take action, get off the sidelines. Because if somebody has written a book or has wisdom to share and they've never been blessed to do an interview, it can be transformational, can change their life to have the opportunity to share their wisdom with others. People contact them and say, wow, I love that idea that you shared the other day. I was just flipping through different things to listen to or watch, and I came across you. I'd never heard of you before. It's like, wow, what you had to say really resonated with me. I think we all have that potential. So I love teaching others. Here's how you do it.
Yeah, I love that. So, ladies, that person listening right now, if you are feeling called to go and have a conversation with Tom, please reach out to him. LinkedIn, I recommend. The other links will be in the description below. Go and check him out. There's an obligation. And just say to him, if you have that conversation, I said hi. For myself, I'll see you on part 2. Remember, this is Rest from the Ashes. This is your story, your way. You are the miracle, and I'll see you very soon. Have an amazing day on purpose.